We are bombarded by lots of media in lots of different ways, and certainly in social media there's lots of different posts that come up, lots of different tweets, etc. And there's one which has been occurring over the last little while where people put up photographs with a kind of a puzzle, and this one I'm thinking about is it's a photograph, it's a picture, lots of different types, and they're just put up on the screen, and there's a cryptic question, and the cryptic question is, what is wrong with this picture? And usually you stare at it and you're trying to work out what actually it is, and either you can't see it, see what's wrong at all, or you kind of know something's not right about it but you just can't put your finger on it. Then someone points out the incongruity, the thing that's really wrong with it. And there's certainly one I'm thinking of, one in particular, which is a group of sisters sat on a sofa, all dressed up, ready to go out for a family meal. And it looks all fine, but you kind of know something's not quite right. And then you're prompted by someone in the comments to count the number of legs, and that you realise that there's either one too many or one too few. It just doesn't seem right. And it's merely an optical illusion, but nonetheless, the picture doesn't look right. And the picture presented here in John chapter 4 of Jesus speaking with this woman, to us seems fine. It just is a man chatting to a woman, like at a bus stop, and it's at a well. But it is incredibly wrong. This shouldn't be happening. And for a couple of different reasons. First of all, Jesus shouldn't be speaking to her because she's a woman. Jesus is known to be a holy man, a rabbi, and a devout Jewish man would never be seen alone with a woman that wasn't his wife. And if ever that scenario happened, he would actually actively ignore her, not engage with her at all. He and she would know the conventions, they'd know the boundaries, and neither of them would cross them. So first of all, he shouldn't speak to her because she's a woman. Secondly, because she's a Samaritan. Now, we know perhaps that Jews and Samaritans don't mix. That was the rule, and it was deeply embedded in history. Since the division of the kingdom to the north of Israel and the south in Judah during the exile, the country of Assyria resettled foreigners in this area of land between Judea and Galilee. It was called Samaria in around 720 BC. And so there was a sense of loss of religious and racial purity because of that. When the exiles who were still in Babylon returned, there were clashes between these new inhabitants and the real Jews who were returning. And it was finally topped off with the Samaritans building their own temple on Mount Gerizim in Samaria, because they weren't allowed to go to the one in Jerusalem. And the common phrase was that you weren't even allowed to share crockery with the Samaritans. Now, I was brought up in Northern Ireland, as is well known. There has historically been a conflict between two factions, between Catholics and Protestants, kind of from the same background and family. That's how it's seen. And usually the antagonism and anger sits with those who actually don't even know what the real theological differences or even cultural differences are at the root of this age-old division. It's often more about political than religious reasons. So that was the context of my upbringing. So I kind of understand that animosity and that distance there was between Jews and Samaritans. Neither was supposed to mix with the other. So she's a woman, she's a Samaritan, and maybe slightly more subtly, she has a dubious character. She's ostracized by her community. And how we know that is because she's drawing water from the well at noon in the hottest part of the day. When other women would have gone in the morning when the day was cooler to collect their water, she's going when she's not going to be associating with anybody. From this we can deduce that from that and from the conversation with Jesus that this ostracizing is probably due to her background of 5 failed marriages and her possible role in these breakdowns and her present living arrangements, which was with another man outside of marriage. So here is a Samaritan woman ostracized by her community because she is morally dubious, meeting with Jesus in the middle of the day. It's quite a contrast to the conversation with Nicodemus, isn't it? But yet here we have Jesus blowing away these human construct conventions. Jesus, in what could be argued is enemy territory, he's sitting down at Jacob's well at the hottest part of the day, exhausted and thirsty, and he strikes up a conversation with this woman, and he really shouldn't have. She probably was pretty shocked at this, and he asks her for a drink of water from the well. She knows he's not supposed to be doing this, and yet Jesus goes beyond the borders, beyond nationalities, beyond this segregation. He starts to share, using their shared desire for water. He starts to share the truth about God with her. Now, I don't know how you imagine the scene. One way of reading it sounds very dry and almost scripted, but actually another way of reading it makes it more real, and it's like an animated conversation, and it's ripe with humor, and dare I say, I think it's ripe with banter as well. Jesus says to her, "Give me a drink of water," and she says, "What we're not supposed to," and he says, "If you asked, I would have given you living water," and she goes, "But you haven't got a bucket," and then she says, "Well, if you've got water that never runs out, tell me where I can get it from, because then I don't have to come to this well all the time." There's a humor and a human banter between the two. It's actually really beautiful. But then Jesus pulls the rug out from underneath her with a personal and supernatural insight. He asks her about her marriage. He asks her to bring her husband. And by revealing to her that he knows that she's been married 5 times and that she's living with a 6th man, he's not just telling her that he has this information, he's communicating with her that he knows her. She's had 5 husbands, and whilst that sounds dodgy, in a society where really only men could divorce, she is a 5 times rejected and abandoned woman. She's not married to the man she's with now. Perhaps the kind of 5 times bitten, however many times shy, I don't know. The fact that she's there at that well, the hottest part of the day, communicates that she is an outcast. The other women may not want to be associated with her. She may have had some responsibility in the marriage breakdowns. At the very least, she will have been the subject of rumour mongering about them. But in spite of her being a Samaritan, or a woman, or indeed a woman of possibly dubious morals, Jesus still engages with her freely and easily. And notice that there is no hint of condemnation here from Jesus, just a knowledge and a gentle exposure of the truth of Jesus saying, "I know you and I know your background." This woman is being told that she is accepted even when Jesus knows everything about her. The usual message that she's received is one of religious and cultural rejection, and Jesus completely contradicts that. When Jesus hits this sore spot, the bit that's raw and vulnerable for her, like so many of us, what does she do? She changes the subject from the personal to the abstract to the different and to the theological. She starts talking about Mount Gerizim and Jerusalem and worship and Samaritans and Jews, to which Jesus blows her old way of thinking apart with the announcement of what true worship looks like. Worship not limited by geography or nationality or racial identity or even moral character. It is worship in spirit and it's worship in truth. A worship which transcends religious rigour and becomes deeply real and relational with the Father. Worship is literally inspired by the Spirit of God, and which, especially emphasized in Greek, the word aletheia, is more than truth. It's about reality. It's about genuineness, not just a surface level faith or kind of lip service. It's about reality and rawness and realness. There are 2 things to note about this woman and Jesus. Firstly, she has one more deflection up her sleeve. The Messiah. She says when he comes, the Messiah will sort everything out, and she would not have expected the reply that she receives. Jesus says to her, "I am the one." What's interesting is this is the first time, certainly in John, and one of the very few times in all the Gospels, where Jesus openly and without confusion admits exactly who he is. And who is he admitting it to? He's admitting it to a dodgy woman from an outcast race. And the second thing is this, where this encounter with Jesus leads. The woman is clearly still in a state of wonder and confusion. She hasn't got all her theological I's dotted and T's crossed. She's probably confused at all the talk about water and spirit and the mind-blowing idea of worship being outside either of the temples. She's encountered Jesus, the Messiah, and she runs off, leaving her precious water jar to go and tell people. And who does she tell? She tells everyone in the town. Now that probably includes every person who has shunned her, sniggered at her, and gossiped and maligned her behind her back. She goes and she doesn't explain the intricacies of theological mysteries. She simply says, "Come and see." And it's really similar to what Philip does in chapter 1 when he comes to Nathanael. He says, "Come and see. Come and see for yourself." An invitation to come and see Jesus, to experience him for yourself based upon her experience of him. And what is the result of this? Verse 39. Many Samaritans from that town believed in Jesus because of her story. They then really want to spend time with Jesus, so he spends for another couple of days with them, and they ultimately announce in verse 42 that they have seen for themselves that Jesus is not just Messiah, but they give him this title, the Saviour of the world. That's massive. So this woman, the wrong woman, ends up being an incredible evangelist, the first to the Samaritan people. And sometimes all it takes is the right person to meet Jesus and for them to share their story and invite others to find out for themselves, even if that person is the most unlikely person that you'd expect.